Questions with Sarah. I am a business owner, wife, and mom of 4 in a neurodivergent household. This is part 2 of my series on neurodivergent disorders, and I'm going to be talking about autism in kids with a special bit of focus born female. If you find this information helpful, please like and subscribe so you can follow along with the rest of the series. And you can also find my free downloadable list of neurodivergent conditions and supports that we use in the comments and description. So today I'm going to be talking about how our firstborn and eldest child's autism made itself known. And hopefully this information will be helpful to you and your journey. Please note, I am not a doctor. I am in no way attempting nor qualified to diagnose. But my hope is that some of the things that I share maybe resonate with you and you can go about seeking some answers and feeling like maybe it isn't just in your head, because I've been there. I felt that. Maybe it's your child, maybe it is a niece or a nephew, maybe it's a child at daycare that you go to or that you work at. Maybe there is just a kid in your life that is exhibiting some behaviors that are confusing. Maybe you feel like you can't connect with them, or as a parent, maybe they're harder to parent than some of your other kids. So in my last video, I talked about how we discovered my husband had autism. And after we learned that, it took us a few years to understand the genetic components in play for children that we might have had. So current research suggests that inheritability from parent to child is estimating 50 to 90% chance that if you are autistic, your child or children may be autistic. Between siblings in a neurodivergent household, the recurrence is 10 to 20%. So the more kids you have, the more likely you may have additional kids who have a neurodivergent diagnosis. The research also suggests that when parents both are neurodivergent, me with my ADHD, my husband with his autism, that the likelihood of children being neurodivergent in the household is that much higher. So basic info to know, boys are still diagnosed at a much higher rate than girls. The ratio usually 3 to 1 or 4 to 1. But researchers do believe that there is a big gender gap due to the differences in how autism presents in those born male versus born female, and with the diagnostic criteria and practices for testing. So while boys tend to exhibit more of those stereotypical autistic behaviors, like stimming or highly restricted interests and repetitive behaviors, girls may be a little more subtle or atypical, and so their symptoms can be overlooked or misinterpreted. Looking back now as a parent, there were some things that were definitely signs of autism in our baby and in our toddler. We didn't know these were unusual. They were our firstborn. It was all new to us, but it would have been so helpful if somebody had just supported us and pointed some of these things out. So just some of the things we experienced. At 6 weeks postpartum, I attempted to return to my full-time job. Our child refused any sort of bottle or pacifier and would literally not eat for 9 hours. And then when I would come home after work to pick them up, they would ravenously nurse. And so they were hungry the whole time I was gone, every single day. The window to feed them when they were hungry was very short. If I did not pick up on those cues really quickly and feed them, they would then have a meltdown and refuse to eat, even though it was very clear they were hungry. They had gone too far and could not calm enough to receive what they actually needed. They wouldn't sleep unless they were swaddled and in a side-to-side swing for the first 8 months of their life. Once we got them out of the swing and the swaddle, they would only sleep in their own pack and play, which meant we hauled that thing around everywhere we went. We had to be home by 7 p.m. no matter what, because if we missed bedtime or tried to put them to sleep and then wake them up to go home, they would then be up for hours crying, unable to settle back down. As they got a little bit older, playing with other kids was a challenge. Their idea of play was dictating to the other kids what was going to happen next for every single one of their toys. They had no concept of personal boundaries. One time, a friend was reaching to hand them something, and they literally used that friend's sleeve as a napkin because it just seemed like it was an okay thing to do. Once they attempted to enter school, they struggled to understand the rules, often talking over the teacher to share something that they already knew. They couldn't comprehend the raising of hands or inappropriateness of that. And making friends was especially difficult, as they couldn't understand social cues and would end up with friends who would be mean to them one day and nice to the next, and they just couldn't understand what was happening. The hard thing really was for us that our pediatrician never pointed out that any of these things weren't typical. When we first approached a specialist after my husband's process at around 8, we were dismissed and told they were just highly intelligent. But we continued to see them struggle. So we went to a new specialist, and after a full evaluation, we very quickly received a diagnosis of autism. At that point, we talked about it and we decided to help them. We wanted to discuss it. They were now 11 years old, so they knew there were some things that were different. And it actually really helped them to understand what was going on and then to start to work toward learning some skills that would make social situations a little bit more comfortable for them and a little more successful. So specifically with girls and those born female, the things I'm going to talk about next are some things that they might do that can make getting a diagnosis really difficult. So the first one is called social camouflaging. Girls with autism can engage in social camouflaging by picking up on what others are doing and then mimicking that. They observe and then they mimic. This can make it really hard to notice if they're actually struggling to connect. Our child would spend a large amount of their energy every day trying to fit in at school and outside of the home, trying to mimic what they thought was appropriate. The next one is special interests or hyperfixations. This is not gender exclusive. The difference with boys is that they may be very, very particular about what it is that they are interested in and unable to have a conversation about anything else. Girls' interests may be more socially acceptable or appear typical. So they might be really deeply immersed in a variety of animals versus one specific type or breed of animal. They might talk about different types of literature versus one specific book or specific author, different forms of art versus just one artist or one type of medium that they perceive as the right one. Our child would often appear like they were listening to someone else's interests, but would quickly turn around to talking about their own as soon as that person was done. Another one, mimicking social behaviors. So girls with autism may mimic social behaviors. Again, it's that observation and then the copying. It can give the impression of social competence, but it's actually just masking the difficulties that they're having in genuinely connecting with others. So for our child, this led to applying some of these behaviors and mimicking these things at inappropriate times or in incorrect settings, which then led to uncomfortable situations or feeling hesitant to engage because they didn't receive the reaction that they expected. It didn't go how they thought it would from past observations. Sensory sensitivities, again, not something that is specific by gender, but girls with sensory sensitivities to loud sounds or lots of sound, textures that they don't like, overstimulating lights, especially in a school environment, super common. They might come up with some coping skills where they're trying to manage those things, and it can be less obvious, especially for those who are born female due to societal and cultural pressures on girls to be nice or ladylike or not disruptive. They will repress what they're feeling and how uncomfortable they actually are. And that took a lot of years of work for our oldest to overcome, and is continuing to be a work in progress. Emotional regulation. This one is a big one. So girls or females with autism can experience really intense emotions well before puberty. But they tend to internalize or express them in ways that seem socially acceptable, making it challenging to realize just how distressed they are. Often our child would hold it together at school, and then they would come home and explode in this emotional meltdown because it was their safe place. And they had used up all of their ability to regulate, to get through the school day, through those outings, and through those social interactions. Research shows that undiagnosed autism in females may be associated with increased risk of mental health conditions, including depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, feelings of isolation, alienation, and frustration due to difficulties understanding social cues, navigating relationships, and meeting societal expectations of them, especially as they move toward adulthood. Constantly masking their autistic traits will continue to worsen their mental health. And they can develop coping mechanisms, some really unhealthy and harmful, to hide the difficulties that they are facing, to blend in with peers and at work, leading to exhaustion and burnout and internalized stress. So if, as a parent or a loved one, if you have that nagging feeling, that suspicion that something else is going on, I really encourage you to keep pushing for answers. It took us, like I said, until 11 to get a proper diagnosis. And there was a lot of pain and frustration that could have been avoided if we had gotten that earlier on. If you would like my free download list of neurodivergent conditions and some of the supports that we have found that are really helpful, you can find that information on my homepage or in the details. And if you enjoyed this video and it was helpful to you, please like and subscribe. It is part 2 of what will be an ongoing series on neurodiversity and what we have experienced. I'm wishing you so much wellness today. Bye-bye.